I think the writers really inspired SAG-AFTRA to go on strike this year. I think it was also different because there's a greater consciousness of the power of withholding labor.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Something else that I was interested in talking to you about is the SAG and WGA strikes being over. You've mentioned on your show a few times, and I'm interested in you kind of diving into what was going on back in 2007 when the WGA went on strike, because you've said that, during this strike, the writers and Hollywood generally have been it's been much more unified against the media companies. Whereas before in 2007, you said that it was not that way, and there were people like publicly bashing their union and saying that we need to go back to work under the terms that the media companies are proposing and all this kind of stuff. And so I do not, I was not, I was alive and I was cognizant, obviously, but I was not paying attention to what was going on around me. And so talk to us about what was going on back in 2007 and the differences between then relative to Hollywood labor and then broader labor and today.
Well, broadly speaking, unions were just a lot less popular in 2007. There wasn't, they were considered anachronistic. In fact, even like, I remember just maybe 7-8 years ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, but, Richie Selson, who was a former union organizer, had written a piece called Fortress Unionism as a way of basically saying, like, the unions need to hunker down and, sort of like solidify what they have. And maybe it came in the wake of, some of these Supreme Court decisions that, people thought would really disempower unions. But back in 2007, the writers, it was just, even like the union itself, if I remember correctly, like just I didn't have a lot of involvement in the union at that time. I was a member of the union because you needed to be to write scripts. But there was no sense of like, of it being a union. Like I remember somebody specifically saying to me, it's not a union, it's a guild.
Oh.
And,
wow. And Adam has heard conversations like that, haven't you?
Yeah, I've heard people talking about union, and they thought about like the Union in the Civil War, like the North. Like, we don't need those bastards down here. We fought them in 1865. And yeah, I've heard association. We're not a union, we're an association. We're a professional organization. Yeah, definitely. That's a refrain that still comes out there, but I think you're right. Even more so, 15 years ago for sure.
And this was coming from, these were, I knew a couple of, pretty successful writers. I don't know what they were doing outside of their conversations with me, or, conversations I heard them, I heard secondhand, or friends talking to friends, that type of thing, but there was a real sense of like, this is stupid, why are we doing this? In both in the acting and the writing industry, it's a little bit less so in terms of writers, but you have people for whom the union minimums and this and that become superfluous because they have made it at a level of success where they don't, the union's not important to them anymore. The union's really important when you're starting out because it allows you to stay in the game, because if you can hit, the thresholds for healthcare, and it's very helpful. And they, also they structure all the residuals and this and that. Ostensibly, on the SAG after side, like how many auditions you can have and this and that stuff is a little bit loose. But the big name successful writers had very little patience for not being able to work. And, you know, I had sold a show on a Friday, and if I remember correctly, they went on strike like we went on strike the next Monday, and the whole thing fell apart. By the time I got back, they had there was a different sort of leadership in the entertainment division at CBS, and ended up selling the thing to HBO, but it really basically went nowhere. And you know, it was frustrating, but you know, I had a sense of like, well, this is everybody's going to do this because the union has our long-term interests in hand, and helping people who don't. You know, I didn't rely on writing as my primary source of income at that time. Although maybe at that time I did. I ended up going back to Air America, or I was still at Air America. I can't remember. But you know, a lot of people did. A lot of people were trying to pick up, you know, episodic jobs and be in writers' rooms, and that wasn't I didn't do that. But it was amazing, and I think the Writers Guild ended. I think it ended too early. The writers' strike did in 07, 08, in part because of pressure they were getting from the more sort of like bigger names within the in the union, and I think there was a genuine fear.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And this is all speculation on my part, but there was a genuine fear that the union was going to pull apart in 07. And whether that was true or not, that was a fear. Whether it was founded or not, that was a fear, without a doubt. And to contrast that with what we saw this time around, you know, I think the writers really inspired SAG-AFTRA to go on strike this year. And I think it was also different because I think just like there's a greater consciousness of the power of withholding labor and the value in it. And I think there's also been changes, you know, I think the last WGA script I wrote was 11 years ago, maybe. So I've been, you know, I haven't been a union member for quite some time of the WGA. But in terms of SAG-AFTRA, I think it has to do with like there are younger people, and in the union, or the younger generation, I should say, is more sort of like more attuned to unionism and the power of labor. And I would also say that I think, and again, like I do a part on a cartoon, but it's a side hustle at this point for me. I think it is harder to, I think the industry has flattened in many respects. Not totally, but it's not like this in terms of like earners. It's more like this. And so there's a lot more people with a lot less to lose, and a lot more people who are, because it's like this. And, you know, the streaming stuff was a real problem in terms of the way the industry was structured. And I also think that like there was an awareness amongst at least the leadership, and maybe to some extent amongst the members, that there were different incentives for within, you know, there's always like CBS is doing a little better than NBC, or Universal doing a little better than Paramount, and this and that, but they're mostly in the same business. Apple and Amazon and Netflix, to some extent, they're not really in the same business as like the Comcast or the Universal. Like for those companies, the entertainment is like a primary source of revenue. For like Apple and Amazon, like streaming is just a way to get data for them. It's not, it's not the same. It's not their core business proposition. And so there were fissures within the producers, I think, that were structural differences. And I think that probably weakened them, more than at any other time in the past, like old Hollywood versus new sort of like tech Hollywood. That structural differences between their incentives. They did not have incentives that were aligned in the same way that like the old Hollywood did. And so I think that helps the union there. But also you just look around. I mean, you know how this works. Workers in one place see their union empowering themselves. They want to unionize. And workers see one strike work, and so they're like, it's doable, it's possible. And so I think a lot of that has sort of permeated this stuff.
Right. Yeah, I really appreciate that that comparison to 2007 and today. And I can even see some of it. Obviously not specifically the 2007 strike, but even when I started being more kind of politically conscious back in 2015, 2016, the environment around labor and around politics is really kind of totally different than it was back then. And Adam got activated kind of around Occupy, and I know he's seen the same thing to an even greater degree. And so it's there's a lot to feel really, really bleak about today and this month especially, but there's also there's a lot to be thankful for, and a lot to a lot of reason to be hopeful about the future based on where we were compared to where we were in 2007.
Yeah, I agree with that, and like I have even friends who in SAG-AFTRA who are not necessarily like, they're not conservatives, full-on conservatives, but like our politics aren't aligned, right, in many respects. And they were really activated by this. Like, I think like, there was wide understanding that workers are getting screwed in this instance. And the COVID stuff was part of it too, frankly. Like at every else, you wouldn't necessarily expect that, but people were brought in. Sometimes like protections were lax and whatnot on some productions, or sometimes they came back early, or sometimes there was sort of some pressure. But also, I think like there's a general sort of tenuousness, and I think people are finding unions to be more empowering, and they're perceiving it as a mechanism to become more empowered.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.